Have you ever stopped to think if democracy really delivers on its promises? Socrates, one of history's greatest philosophers, was deeply skeptical of democracy. He believed that allowing just anyone to vote, regardless of their education or wisdom, was a recipe for disaster. In this video, we're going to break down why, even though democracy is hailed as one of ancient Athens' greatest legacies, it might not be as fair as we've been led to believe. We'll dive into the hidden flaws of the system, question whether voting should be something people are actually trained to do, and explore why populist leaders, what Socrates called candy store owners, keep getting elected. If you've ever felt like, despite casting your vote, your needs and society's real problems are being ignored, this video is going to offer you a whole new take on modern democracy. Democracy, in theory, is supposed to ensure that every voice is heard, and that the will of the majority wins out. But what we often see in practice is a system manipulated by powerful groups and economic interests. Elections frequently end with candidates in power who don't really represent the people, but cater to elites or influential minorities who know how to game the political system. The result? The average person feels like they have little control over the big decisions that affect their lives, even in a democracy. Socrates, one of the sharpest critics of Athenian democracy, was skeptical of the idea that everyone should have the right to vote. He believed voting should be reserved for those with the knowledge and wisdom to make informed decisions. This brings us to his famous ship metaphor. For Socrates, letting anyone vote without the right education was like putting an inexperienced captain in charge of steering a ship through a storm. The outcome? Almost guaranteed shipwreck. The problem is, modern society seems to have completely ignored that warning. We treat voting as an inalienable right, without considering how prepared people are to make such crucial choices. We vote based on catchy slogans and vague promises, often without knowing the details of the policies or the consequences of those decisions. This results in elections where the outcome is less about the will of the people and more about how well political campaigns manipulate voters. On top of that, the electoral system itself has its flaws. In many countries, voting is mandatory, but voters don't receive the political education they need to make informed choices. The lack of real debates and the superficial nature of many campaigns only make this worse. Those who master the art of propaganda often win, while important issues fall by the wayside. As Socrates argued, voting isn't just a right, it's a skill that should be taught. When we stop treating voting as a powerful tool that requires knowledge, we run the risk of electing leaders who aren't equipped to handle the challenges our society faces. And that brings us to another problem: the inefficiency of the system during times of crisis. Democracy, for all its talk of freedom and participation, also comes with a lot of issues, particularly when it comes to bureaucracy and the slow pace of decision-making. When a crisis hits, whether it's a pandemic or an economic meltdown, democratic governments often struggle to respond quickly and effectively. The need for consensus and lengthy debates, while important for ensuring representation, often delays the implementation of critical solutions. His kind of inefficiency was something Socrates saw coming when he questioned democracy's ability to act quickly and wisely. He argued that voting should be a skill, something people develop over time, not just a snap decision made on impulse. When people without the proper knowledge or experience are called on to make important choices, the result is often either paralysis or, worse, poor decisions that lead to even bigger problems. Bureaucracy is another obstacle that frequently stands in the way. Democratic processes involve many steps, from proposing a law to getting it passed and implemented. While that can be a good thing when it comes to protecting citizens' rights, it's a major issue during times of urgency. Think about a situation where a city faces a public health crisis, but the actions needed to address the problem are delayed because every move has to go through various legislative approvals. On top of that, bureaucratic inefficiency often leads to widespread frustration among voters. Even when people cast their ballots and actively participate in the democratic process, they see little real change in their day-to-day lives. This disconnect between the people and their leaders fosters the belief that no matter who gets elected, the solutions to everyday problems will continue to be delayed by bureaucratic red tape. So, the inefficiency of democracy isn't just about representation. It's about speed and agility too. In times of crisis, this slow response can be devastating. And when everyone starts noticing the inefficiency, it creates the perfect opportunity for demagogues to rise, offering quick and easy solutions, often at the expense of democratic processes. The tyranny of the majority is another serious issue within a democratic system. While democracy is based on following the will of the majority, that doesn't always result in fairness for everyone. Minorities are often trampled or ignored, with their needs pushed aside. This dynamic creates an environment where the majority's will can easily morph into oppression, with devastating consequences for those who don't fit into the preferences of the dominant group. Socrates experienced this firsthand in a tragic way. He was sentenced to death by a jury of 500 Athenian citizens who found him guilty of corrupting the youth with his philosophical ideas. His trial was a classic example of the tyranny of the majority. The decision wasn't made by people seeking truth or justice, but rather by a group that wanted to punish someone who challenged their beliefs. The tragedy of Socrates' death highlights one of democracy's biggest dangers: when a poorly informed majority imposes its will in an authoritarian manner. This problem gets worse with the rise of demagogues. Socrates warned that demagoguery is a constant threat in any democracy that lacks proper education. These populist leaders, whom he likened to candy store owners, attract the public with easy promises and quick fixes, often without thinking about long-term consequences. They prey on people's immediate desires, offering simple answers to complex problems. This is dangerous because while responsible leaders, the doctors, in Socrates' metaphor, offer tough but necessary solutions, demagogues focus on staying popular by telling the majority what they want to hear. The result is a cycle of unfulfilled promises, bad decisions, and a society that fails to move forward. Every election, these populists gain more support, not because their ideas are sound, but because they know how to play on voters' emotions. Socrates' warning about demagoguery is more relevant today than ever. Democracy without education leads to populism, and populism leads to a decline in the quality of government. We're repeating the same mistakes that led to Socrates' condemnation and the rise of leaders with no long-term vision. Unless we start valuing political education and deeper reflection, we'll keep electing candy store owners instead of real doctors who can address society's deeper problems. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up. And if you're curious to dive deeper into science-based topics, check out our next video. Who talks more, men or women? Science Explains. In it, we break down what science really says about who talks more, men or women, and bust some surprising myths about communication. Don't miss it.